The first lesson is from the book of Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God? In this reading, may we find God's word for us. Thanks be to God. Please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. The gospel is from the book of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to this place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved to pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." In this reading, may we find the gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ.
That's quite a statement. For the rest of my life, I will serve the Lord. But not only that, but for the rest of my life, I will trust the Lord. That's quite a statement of faith this morning, and what a good way to get the sermon going. Good morning to all of you. Buenos dias. May the peace of God be truly yours this day. And whatever has brought you to this sacred space, may you find it through the grace of God's love and the presence of the Holy Spirit. Open your hearts and your minds and let God speak to you this day. Our 2 readings for this morning for the scripture are quite familiar ones. One from Micah, a text that is well known, used by many groups in our society, include many groups that fight for social justice. What is it that God demands of you? Question that's answered to us in Micah. And then the familiar parable about the Samaritan, often called the Good Samaritan. The story is indeed a familiar one. Jesus is approached by a religious man who, wanting to show off his religiosity, asks him 2 simple but loaded questions. The first, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And the second, who is my neighbor? Jesus knew that the man knew the answers to both questions, and the man knew that Jesus knew he knew the answers, because after all, he is described in the text as an expert in the law. Yet there he was, standing before Jesus, bearing mock humility, asking questions not meant to to bring about honest dialogue, but to show Jesus lacking in his knowledge of the law, all the while showing the man's expertise and self-righteousness. This expert in the law didn't really generally care to hear an answer for himself, was trying to trip up Jesus in his words, to put him to the test. He wanted to see if Jesus' response was in line with what the scribes and the Pharisees were teaching on the subject. And without missing a beat, Jesus turns the situation on its head. First, he concedes the man's knowledge of the law when he tells the expert, "You have answered correctly." But then he begins to tell a parable. And in a wink of an eye, the expert of religious law now has to answer Jesus' questions. And his answer betrays both his arrogance and his sin. The question is, how did this guy get himself into such a mess? How did this conversation get turned around so quickly that now the expert in the law was being challenged by Jesus' teaching? What elements of the parable that Jesus told the audience were making the entire situation so religiously uncomfortable for the self-righteous man? Yes, indeed, as happens often in the gospel narrative, Jesus is a troublemaker, and here he is at it again. The two questions that the religious man poses to Jesus, how does one obtain eternal life and who is my neighbor, have been part of the religious landscape for centuries. All religions seek to provide an answer to these two basic and important questions, and here Jesus is being asked to do so again. And what is of great interest is not only the fact that Jesus chooses to respond by telling a story, but what demands our attention are the very concepts and the ideologies and teachings that are embedded in the story. You see, a reality of the religious community of the first century was that the Old Testament was interpreted very narrowly in order to prevent its interference in cultural norms. Jesus confronted this practice on many occasions and would do so again on this occasion by the telling of this parable. The story is really disarmingly simple, and one that any person who hears it can identify with. Robbers attack a man on his journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. And this was no ordinary holdup or ordinary mugging. The man was stripped of all his belongings, including his clothes. He was beaten, and he was left for dead. Having been the victim of a mugging at knife point in New York City many years ago, the story touches me and resonates with me deeply. I remember the fear and anxiety when the young man showed me the knife and told me not to make any noise so I wouldn't get hurt. Even though in my head, in my fantasy life, I imagined myself doing kung fu to defend myself, I was my own hero, in reality, I was frozen and scared. My legs felt like jelly. I knew that if that young man and his friends managed to get me off of that subway car, I would be facing some pretty awful realities. So when I hear Jesus tell the story of this poor man beaten and robbed, I sympathize. Jesus has caught my attention and he has captured my heart. So as a next step to the story, I look for someone to change the outcome of what is so far a rather grim tale. Like I did as I looked around the faces of the many people in that subway car where my own safety was being challenged. The bottom line is that to be a victim means to be vulnerable. The victim is not only powerless, but quite often voiceless, which means invisible. This parable makes clear the point that makes that point clear to us, because in verse 30 we are told that the man was attacked and left for half dead. He cannot speak for himself to ask for help. He cannot move to seek shelter and healing. He cannot advocate for his safety. And so when I hear the parable, I look for a hero. I look for someone to make a difference in this story. But maybe I'm asking too much. After all, heroes and saviors are hard to come by. So instead, I am willing to settle for at least someone who cares. And there's the first man, walking along, and he looks like an excellent prospect to provide help. After all, he is a priest. Now, we all know that clergy people are supposed to do good, so we know this priest is going to make a difference and that he will care. But lo and behold, he sees the wounded man and crosses the street. Now, that is certainly not priestly behavior, and I am perturbed. A clergy person who doesn't care? What is the world coming to? Aren't clergy people called by God, and yet he crossed the street? But look, wait, there's someone else coming along. Now, I hope the second man will do better. This man is a Levite, and we know that Levites had a special commitment to God, so we know that he will do the right thing. But wait, look at that. The Levite, just like the priest, sees the naked and wounded man and also crosses the street. Now, there's something definitely wrong here. The two religious types, the two men who are the religious models for their communities, the ones who know the law and are familiar with its requirements, yet both have turned a blind eye to the wounded and robbed man lying in the street. In our church lingo, we would call these two men in the church, church-going types. Why, they may even have gone to seminary and taken biblical exegesis courses, and maybe taken some ethic classes. Yet their behavior belies and unravels our human-held notion that religious belief and the practice of that belief are somehow mutually connected in a dialectic where belief is nourished and sustained by faith-filled action. Or said in another way, faith without works is dead. Religious belief demands action. You can't just talk the talk without walking the walk. So Jesus decides to set the record straight. You see, Jesus knew that like the expert in the law who stood before him asking him important theological questions, he really didn't know the answers to them. Because humans may profess to believe in many things, my friends, but how they take that belief and express it in concrete acts of love and mercy and justice, that's a whole other story. To talk the talk does not equate to walking the walk, which is why Abraham Heschel, famous prophet, rabbi who taught at New York, at a Jewish theological seminary right here, up by across the street from Union, who said, God is hiding in the world. Our task is to let the divine emerge from our deeds. Isn't that beautiful? Our God is hiding in the world, says Abraham Heschel. And our task is to let the divine emerge from our deeds. Now, I don't just want to dismiss these two men, the priest and the Levite, and to say that they are bad men, which is why they walked away. Because the reality is much more complex. Human reality is always much more complex. Nothing is ever black and white. It is difficult to overstate the level of animosity between Jews and Samaritans in Jesus' day. Samaritans were descendants of non-Jews who had resettled in the area just north of Jerusalem by the Assyrians 700 years earlier. By the time that Jesus was there standing with this group of people, many Samaritans were the offspring of marriages between non-Jews and Jews. The hatred ran so deep between Jews and Samaritans that many Jews preferred to travel east and cross the Jordan River before heading north to Galilee or south to Judah. In this way, they could avoid traveling through the region of Samaria, which lay between Judah and Galilee. There was also the issue with the requirements of the religious law. If they had stopped to help this man, then the law would declare that they would become unclean. The priest and the Levite believed that they needed to preserve their ritual purity if they were to continue to carry on their religious roles. But here is the great tragedy in that kind of thinking. The tragedy is that in their effort to remain within the requirements of the law, they failed to respond to the human reality of the law. They failed to respond to human need, and they failed to respond to human worth. This was an issue Jesus confronted on numerous occasions throughout the Gospels. The law was not to become so rigid, so mired in requirements that it could not respond to the needs of humans to relate to God and to relate to one another. The lawyer who came to Jesus asking theological questions was made by Jesus to answer clearly what the law said about God and neighbor. If we reread verse 27, we will hear, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." And because of this answer, Jesus makes the key person in the parable a Samaritan. No need, again, to belabor how Jews and Samaritans disliked and hated one another. Their differences were not only religious, but also cultural. Yet it is a Samaritan man who plays the hero in Jesus' parable. It is a Samaritan man who ends up fulfilling the law, not the priest and not the Levite. Listen to how verse 33 describes what motivated the Samaritan to reach out and help the robbed and beaten man. The Bible tells us, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. The Samaritan was able to identify with the victim. He was able to emphasize with the man's loss and pain. He was able to understand that he too could at any moment be the one lying beaten and left for dead on that street. The Samaritan was the only one of the three men who was not so self-preoccupied in outward appearances that he was able to perceive his own vulnerability and able to see himself in that place of vulnerability and loss. Now, if this was scandalous and outrageous to the Jews listening to Jesus, they were about to be even more outraged and scandalized. Verses 34 and 35 tell us that the Samaritan not only stopped to help the man, to physically care for him, to tend to his wounds and his hurts, but he provided from his own money to make sure that the needed care would be provided on a longer-term basis until the man was able to provide for himself. I want us to take a pause here and to listen with our hearts to the story that Jesus is telling us. We must be clear that what Jesus is describing in this parable is not the Samaritan as a do-gooder. I want to emphasize this because, unfortunately, it is often the mentality of the do-gooder that permeates what passes for charity in this country, especially in congregations, Christian congregations. What Jesus is talking about is something more profound, something more daring, something more risky, something that's going to take a little bit more. Because the works of mercy, which is what Jesus is talking about, the works of mercy that God demands of us require more than a food basket or donations to Goodwill. The works of mercy require risk-taking because they require that the person reaching out stand in mercy with, and not only for, the one who has been wounded, the one who is vulnerable, the one who has been left for dead. The Samaritan took a detour from his trip. He stopped. He gave of his time. One of our most precious commodities, time. He gave of his time. He helped to pick up a man. He probably got his clothes dirty, stained them with blood. He took him to a place of shelter. He cared personally for his wounds. He washed him. He cleansed him. He soothed him with salves and creams. And then he spoke to the people at the inn, making sure, and he paid for this, that they would continue to care for him and not neglect him. The Samaritan did this because he understood and acknowledged his own humanity in that wounded stranger. This is the dialectic that I am talking about. The works of mercy reveal our own need for mercy. The works of mercy reveal our own limitations. The works of mercy reveal our own poverty of spirit. They reveal our own need for God. Such revelation is more often than not frightening and something we would rather not deal with. That is why it is much simpler to remain at the do-gooder level. But this is not what the parable teaches, and this is not what the prophet is talking about. The Samaritan provided from his wealth, whether it was large or small, and was willing to do it more than once. The Samaritan dared to risk his time and his money on behalf of someone whose vulnerability left him with no options. Jesus lifts up the Samaritan as the model. This Samaritan is the one the expert in the law needs to emulate, and herein lies the scandal. Jesus has dared to make the hero of the parable a Samaritan. Jesus has made the person who responded with mercy and justice a Samaritan. We see how Jesus takes someone who has been excluded by the Jewish community, especially by the religious Jews, and has made him the example of obedience to the law, and has made him and put him at the center of God's attention. It is clear to us, as it was to that audience long ago, that Jesus not only accepts the outcasts, but he saw them as examples and a symbol of discipleship in the kingdom. This kind of theological premise is what I call Samaritan theology. Samaritan theology is about how God, through Jesus the Christ, decenters the center. those places of power and prestige and wealth, so that the focus is now on those who have been left out, those who have been excluded, those who have been devalued, those who have been pushed aside, those who have been ignored, those who have been dismissed, those that we not even think about. Jesus places that group of people, those that we often so easily call those people, at the center of the kingdom. To live out the core concepts of Samaritan theology, one does not need a seminary degree. One does not need extensive biblical studies. To do justice and to act with mercy so that God may emerge in our world does not require that you lead a monastic life. Why, to be faithful to the call of Samaritan theology, you don't even have to speak English and you don't even need a green card. And this is because the core concepts of Samaritan theology, justice and mercy, which also involve hospitality and healing, are about what is at the center of the human heart. Samaritan theology is an invitation into an interesting life, into an unleashing of one's inner power, into authentic community, into the possibility of fulfillment in a vacuous society. And even more than that, Samaritan theology is about deep and abiding love. Love, my sisters and brothers, that is there for the long haul. It is about a love that is deep and strong and not easily frightened or dismayed. But it is also about a deep faith that cannot be shaken quite easily. It cannot be moved, rattled. It is about a faith that keeps on giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. A faith that is willing to take risks, a faith that is willing to speak truth and fight for justice. Samaritan theology dares to call us, dares to summon us to do justice and show mercy, which is often a heartbreaking task, because it means that we have to first acknowledge our own indifference. We have to first acknowledge our own fear of those who are not like us. We have to acknowledge our own unwillingness to move beyond our safety zones. Samaritan theology challenges our incomplete understanding of what God is requiring of us. As we look upon the vulnerable, the silenced, the ignored, the outsider, an important element of Samaritan theology is to acknowledge that more often than we would like to admit, we too walk away from those found on the road. That we too, each of us, has our blind spots. And that sometimes we have talked the talk more than we have walked the walk. That is why, as Jesus speaks through us through the images and stories and heroes that are found in Samaritan theology, we must also respond to its core ethical challenge. To do justice and to show mercy is what you and I have been called to do. It is the call of the cross that is embodied in Samaritan theology. To say yes to the call made through us through Samaritan theology is to affirm life. It is to be healed and empowered. It is the stirring of the Holy Spirit in our being. It's loosening up all that crud that's in there that won't let you do what you need, you got to do. Loosens it up and releases you. It releases us from our fear so that when we face that woman, that child, that man who lies before us vulnerable and wounded, we will not look away. We will not pass judgment. And we will not be afraid to take the risks that are inevitable when we love. When we respond to the call of Samaritan theology, we will be able to enter new depths of sharing, of mutual love, and exuberant faith. Isn't it wonderful to have an exuberant faith? Sometimes our faith is tepid. Oh yes, lovely. Oh yes, hallelujah. But this is an exuberant faith. It fills the church, fills our lungs with praise and exuberant faith that's joy-filled. It's also in the response to Samaritan theology when we will be made hungry for the experience of living in community. To respond to the call of Samaritan Theology is to learn to live in true solidarity. John Sobrino, Latin American theologian, defines solidarity as the tenderness of peoples. What a beautiful definition. Solidarity, the tenderness of peoples. In other words, we will not be afraid to be tender with one another, to step aside and let another pass, to create a space for those who are pushed out, whether because of racism or hate or ignorance. And it was, my sisters and brothers, hermanas y hermanos, it was the tenderness of a Samaritan man that enabled him to reach out and help the wounded and robbed man. It enabled him to use his resources for the benefit of his neighbor. It enabled him to care deeply and thereby to make a difference in an indifferent world that still does not know how to live together as sisters and brothers. Jesus looked at the expert of the law and told him, "Go and do likewise." This morning, here in this place, Jesus looks at us and tells us, "Go and do likewise."